look where we are now. We have this system. We're wasting this tremendous amount of time on eliminating the one independence that the one balance that the system of government has, which is an independent judiciary.
Which needs to be reformed.
It needs to be reformed,
but not like this. Not like this.
It needs to be reformed in a completely different way. Look, what does it need to be reformed? It needs to be reformed two easy examples. One, the trial of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Why does a trial last for 2 years? Why is that possible that a trial lasts for 2 years as opposed to 2 months or 3 months? That's number one. The most complicated trials in America last 2 months. Number two, I'll give you a very simple example that drives me crazy that people don't know talking about it. There's this retrial of this guy named Roman Zadarov, who was accused of murder, who was convicted, and the Supreme Court overturned the conviction, and there's a retrial. I don't want to get into whether he's guilty or not guilty or anything else, but they finished the trial 3 months ago. The judges have announced they're going to announce a decision on March 30th. Excuse me, if the trial ended 3 months ago, why couldn't you sit that night, make a decision, and say whether he's guilty or not guilty? Why 3 months later you're going to announce your decision?
And why?
Because that's the way the system works. You have judges that are simultaneously...
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. You have judges that are simultaneously dealing with 50 or 60 trials simultaneously. Forget the Netanyahu trial, which meets 3 times a week. Why it's not meeting 5 times a week, from morning until night, that's a whole other story. But trials here, 1 day here, 1 day 2 months from now, 1 day 3 months from now, and at the end of the whole period of time, the judge is supposed to remember the trial that took place 2 years ago, the witness that spoke 2 years ago, whether you should trust it or not, and then the judge decides. It's a ridiculous system. And the fact that they do multiple trials at one time, all these things are things that make... That's what people are angry about. When you talk about judicial reform, no one is angry about the balance between the Supreme Court and the Knesset, except the Knesset members.
Some people are.
No, just the Knesset members.
No, because it's my understanding that, say, for example, contract law, that if you have, let's say you sign a contract and 5 years later, the one party wants to renegotiate the terms, you can do that because the courts might side with what they think your intention might have been, as opposed to what's in the damn contract.
But that's the law. That's not the judicial reform. Someone has to rewrite the law. Go back to what I said before about all the laws that have been inherited. All you have to do is rewrite the law about contracts and say there's no opening of a contract. That's very simple. You don't have to do judicial reform to do that. Judges only base themselves on the laws they have in front of them.
Do they?
Basically, yes. Yes, there's this question of what's normal or accepted. So I know of a case, for instance, there are a couple of cases going on now. I know one personally of some older person the care person, who managed to get them to sign over their apartment as Yerusha for when they died. Mm-hmm. This was a person who was semi-demented and whatever else in the last years of their lives, but they wrote in their will giving the apartment to this person who was taking care of them for the last 3 months. Now, the only way to stop that is by saying this was not reasonable, because it's not reasonable that they would have left the $1 million apartment to some guy who took care of them for 3 months.
Right.
That's a reasonable. That's a question of reasonableness.
Right.
But the question is the laws. It's not that the Supreme Court. Look, the Supreme Court of this country has overturned 22 laws in 30 years. That's not exactly an activist court. Now, they've angered various constituencies at different times. That's true. But that's not, it's also an excuse. And let's keep in mind something else. The anger of the judiciary only really began when Netanyahu got indicted, and suddenly there was been a campaign against the judiciary for the last 3 years. So we talk about, we need to change the judiciary because the confidence in the court has gone down in the last 3 years. Well, you have to ask the question, why did it go down in the last 3 years? Well, there's been a campaign against the judiciary in the last 3 years. Now, it doesn't mean things can't be improved. I mean, I don't see the reason for having, let's say, members of the Israeli Bar Association being on the group that picks judges, for instance. I mean, the argument that they know judges well, I don't know. That seems a little bit far-fetched to me. So you can replace them with something else. But the general system where they're not really political appointees, the politicians have a say, but it's not political, I think it makes perfect sense. It works well. It has worked well. Other things, think about the United States. The Supreme Court makes a decision, and then the U.S. Congress, by one vote, overturns the Supreme Court decision. What is that supposed to mean? How are you supposed to have any sort of certainty in life, or any sort of law, if the parliament, which is a political public grouping, can overturn the decision of the Supreme Court by one vote. That's an absurd idea, ultimately. And it's an idea of politicians who want more power. One of the problems in this country is there isn't separation of power.
Yeah.
And we need separation of power. True democracy has separation of power. And that's a real concern. And then, of course, especially when you have a government that has so many extremists as part of it.